For the first 3 years of my marriage, I believed my husband loved me. Not because he told me so. Amish men do not say those words easily, and Jonas said them less than most. I believed it because of other things. The way he repaired the loose step on our porch without being asked. The way he always left the warmest spot by the stove for me on cold mornings. The way he stood beside me at every church service, solid and steady, a man who would not be moved. I told myself that was love. I told myself that was the kind of love our community understood. Love that showed itself in work, in presence, in a man who came home every night and sat at the head of his table and provided. For 3 years, I believed that completely. Then, one afternoon, in my 4th year of marriage, I learned one rule, a single rule so simple a child could understand it, that the community had never once spoken out loud in front of me. And when I heard it, I understood that what I had believed about my husband, about my marriage, about love itself, was not wrong exactly, but it was not the whole picture. And the part of the picture I had been missing changed everything. Before I go any further, there's something I want to say from the heart. More than 90% of the people watching right now haven't subscribed yet, and perhaps that wouldn't matter so much if these were just stories. But they're not. They're pieces of a life, pieces of a world that most people never see from the inside, pieces of a truth that took me years to be able to say out loud. So if you found something real in these videos, if something in what I share here has ever made you feel less alone, please take a moment to subscribe. It's completely free, and it helps these stories keep reaching the people who need them. And while you're here, I want to know something. Tell me in the comments, have you ever believed something completely and then learned one small fact that quietly rearranged everything? Because that is exactly what happened to me. And I am going to tell you the whole story right now. My name is Martha, and this is Hannah, the Amish girl, the channel where the stories no one was ever supposed to repeat finally get spoken out loud. I grew up Old Order Amish in Geauga County, Ohio. I married at 19. I left at 26 with 3 children, a suitcase, and the particular kind of exhaustion that does not come from working hard, but from spending years working hard at pretending everything is fine. If you are new here, welcome. And if you have been here before, thank you for coming back. What I am going to tell you today, I have never told in quite this way. Because to tell it properly, I have to start not with the rule itself, but with the man I thought I knew before I learned it. Jonas was 22 when we married. He was the second son of a dairy family 3 farms over. A man with large, quiet hands and a way of standing in a room that made the room feel settled. He was not a talker. He was not a laugher. He did not bring me flowers or write me letters or say the things that English men in movies say to women they love. But he worked. God, he worked. He was in the barn before dawn every morning, and he did not come in until the milking was done and the animals were fed and everything that needed doing had been done. He fixed what broke. He provided what was needed. He led our family the way a good Amish husband leads, quietly, steadily, without drama, by simply being the structure everything else leaned against. I loved him for that. I want to be honest about that because it would be easier now to say I never did. It would make the story cleaner. But I did love him in the way a 19-year-old girl loves the man who has been chosen for her by the logic of her entire world. The man who is everything she has been taught a good man looks like. I loved him the way you love the only map you have ever been given. And here is the first thing I need you to understand, because it matters for the rule I am going to tell you. Everything I just described, the barn, the work, the steadiness, the structure, that was all real. I am not going to stand here and tell you Jonas was secretly a different man. He was exactly who he appeared to be. The problem was not him. The problem was the thing underneath him. The invisible architecture that held him up and that I could not see. Not yet. Not for 4 years, even though I was living inside it every single day. Our first year of marriage was the year of learning each other's patterns. I learned how he took his coffee. He learned how I kept the kitchen. I learned that he went silent when he was worried about money, and that the silence could last 3 days, and that the only thing to do was leave food on the table and wait for it to pass. He learned that I needed 10 minutes alone after the children were in bed before I could talk about anything complicated. We learned each other the way two people learn a shared language, slowly, by trial and error, by small mistakes and small corrections. I thought that was intimacy. I thought that was what marriage built into. By the second year, we had 2 children, and I was already moving through my days with the particular exhaustion of a woman who never quite finishes anything because there is always the next thing already waiting. The baby, the toddler, the meals, the garden, the laundry on the wringer washer, the canning, the mending, the endless, beautiful, crushing weight of a household that depends entirely on you to hold it together. And Jonas at the center of all of it, steady, provided for, and in the evenings, reaching for me in the dark with a certainty that I now understand came not just from desire, but from something else. Something that had a name I did not yet know. The third year was the year I started to feel something I did not have words for at the time. A vague unease. A sense that something about my marriage was slightly out of alignment in a way I could not locate or fix because I could not see it clearly enough to identify it. Jonas had not changed. I had not changed. Everything was exactly as it was supposed to be, according to every template I had ever been given for what a good Amish marriage looked like. And yet there was something, a quality of obligation to our evenings, a shape to our nights that felt less like two people choosing each other and more like a mechanism running exactly as it had been designed to run. I told myself I was tired. I told myself all marriages felt this way after children. I told myself that the flatness I sometimes felt in the dark was not something wrong. It was just what real life felt like. The life after the wedding. The life that did not look like the 7 kinds of pie and the 300 people in the barn. I kept telling myself those things right up until the afternoon in my 4th year, when I sat down at a kitchen table that was not mine and learned the rule. Now here is where I need you to stay with me, because what I am about to tell you sounds simple. And it is simple. That is exactly what made it so devastating. The rule is not complicated. It is not hidden in some obscure theology or buried in Pennsylvania Dutch scripture. It is spoken plainly, between Amish women, in kitchens, at barn raisings, in the margins of every conversation about marriage that women have when the men are not listening. I had simply never been in the right room at the right time to hear it spoken plainly. Until that afternoon. Her name was Ruth. She was 43 years old, the wife of a deacon in a neighboring district, and she had invited 3 of us younger wives over for coffee after a quilting. I did not know her well. I knew her the way you know women in your community, when you see them at church and at community events, but have never sat with them in a kitchen with nowhere else to be. She had a face that had been lived in thoroughly, the kind of face that does not apologize for what it has seen. She poured the coffee, and she sat down, and she looked at each of us in turn, and then she said, completely without introduction, "I want to ask you something. Do any of you know the difference between a husband who loves you and a husband who follows the rule?" None of us said anything. I remember the sound of the coffee cooling in my cup. I remember looking at the other 2 women and seeing on their faces what must have been on mine. The careful blankness of women who have been trained not to say the wrong thing before they know which direction the conversation is going. Ruth looked at our faces and she almost smiled. She said, "None of you know, because no one tells you. They tell your husbands, but they don't tell you." Then she said, "Here is the rule. Every Amish husband is taught, by his father, by the bishop, by the structure of everything he grows up inside, that his wife's body is owed to him. Not as a cruelty, not as a punishment, as a theology, as a law that exists above both of them, handed down by God and enforced by the community. The rule is this: a wife does not have the right to refuse her husband except in cases of serious illness. Everything else, her tiredness, her grief, her sorrow, her simply not wanting to on a given night, is not considered a valid reason. She submits because submission is love. She submits because refusing is sin. She submits because the alternative is a series of consequences that the community will deliver so quietly and so completely that she will feel them everywhere before she ever sees them coming. That is the rule. It is not written down anywhere most wives will ever read, but it governs every bedroom in every farmhouse, in every Amish community, in every state where our people live. And the reason I am telling you, Ruth said, is because I spent 11 years of my marriage believing that when my husband reached for me, he was reaching for me, for Ruth, for the woman he had chosen. I believed that was love. I believed it because no one had ever told me there was a rule underneath it, that the reaching was not only desire, it was also, always, a man exercising a right he had been told was his by God. I sat at Ruth's kitchen table, and I felt the room rearrange itself around me. Not loudly, not with any drama. The way a room rearranges when you realize a piece of furniture you have always thought was load-bearing is actually just decorative. The structure is the same, everything looks the same, but you understand now that the weight is resting on something you cannot see, something underneath, something you were never shown. I drove home that afternoon, the buggy moving through the late afternoon light, the horse knowing the road well enough that my hands could be loose on the reins. And I thought about the 3 years of evenings, the reaching in the dark, the certainty in his hands. I thought about all the times I had been too tired and had said nothing because saying something had never occurred to me as a real option. I thought about the one time, early in our second year, when I had whispered, "Not tonight, please." And Jonas had gone still and turned his back, and the silence had stretched across 3 days like a bruise. I had believed then that the silence was disappointment, that it was the sadness of a man whose wife had turned away from him. I understood now that it was something else. It was the sound a rule makes when it is not being followed. And here is the question I carried home and could not put down for weeks. If a man reaches for his wife because he loves her, and also because he has been told it is his right, and also because the community will enforce that right if she refuses, which of those 3 things is the reaching? Can love and entitlement live in the same pair of hands and both be real? And if they can, what does that mean for every moment I believed was only love? I do not have a clean answer. Jonas loved me. I believe he loved me in the real way, in the staying and the working and the leaving the warm spot by the stove way. I also believe he had never once questioned whether what he reached for in the dark was his right to reach for. The rule had been given to him so early and so completely that it dissolved into everything he believed. Invisible, the way the frame of a house is invisible once the walls are up. You do not think about the frame. You just live inside it. This is what I mean when I say I left not because Jonas was a bad man, but because of the structure underneath him. The system that hands a man a right before he understands what rights cost the people they are taken from. The system that trains a girl from her first Sunday in church to believe her body is a gift she gives, not a body she owns. The system that makes a wife's yes so expected that her no becomes a community emergency. After Ruth's kitchen, I was never quite able to fold myself back into the shape I had been before. Something in me had been uncovered that the cooking and the running could not cover back up. I knew about the rule now, and once you know about a rule you have been living under without knowing, you cannot unknow it. You start to see it everywhere. In the way your husband sits at the head of the table, in the way the bishop preaches, in the way the older women teach the younger women to be good wives, which is always, underneath the warmth, a lesson in compliance. I stayed for 2 more years. The rule was not the only reason I left, but it was the thing that helped me understand the shape of what I was inside. And once you understand the shape of a thing, you can start to find the edges. And once you find the edges, you know where the door is. Outside this community, what Ruth described has a name. Several names. My therapist gave them to me one at a time, carefully, the way you hand someone hot things so they do not get burned all at once. Marital coercion. Theologically encoded obligation. The normalization of consent that is not really consent inside a closed community. None of those words existed in my language. We had one word for what was expected of a wife in the night. We called it duty. We called it holiness. We called it love. Ruth died 2 years before I found my way to a therapist who could give me the other words. I do not know how she learned what she knew, what kitchen she was sitting in when someone first told her, or whether she figured it out alone in the dark, the way some women do, by comparing the map they were given to the territory they actually live in, and noticing where the two do not match. I only know that she told 3 young wives the truth, one winter afternoon over cooling coffee, and that one of them carried that truth out of the community and is sitting here telling you now. My husband loved me. I believe that with everything I have. And I also believe he never once questioned the rule. And the saddest part of our marriage, the part that cannot be fixed by blaming him, is that he never had to. Because in our world, the rule and the love were never separated. They arrived together. They wore the same face. And a woman who has never been shown they are 2 different things has no way to tell them apart until someone, in some kitchen, over some cooling coffee, finally says out loud, "Here is the rule, and here is what it is not." And the difference between them is everything. Before you leave, I want to thank you for staying with me until the very end of this. I know there are millions of videos you could have watched today, and you chose to spend this time here. There is one thing I want to say before you go. More than 90% of the people who watch these videos have not yet subscribed. And if this story touched something in you, if it made you think of a rule you were living under without knowing its name, or a love you believed in that turned out to be more complicated than you had been shown, I hope you will subscribe. It is free, and it keeps these stories, the ones that were never meant to leave the kitchen, alive. And before you go, tell me this in the comments. Did you ever believe something completely about someone you loved, and then learn one thing that made you see it differently? I want to read your answer. Until next time, remember this. Love is real, and so are the structures underneath it. And you are allowed to know the difference.